Okay.
Tomorrow we'll learn at regular time, 8
Yes.
p.m.
Yeah, I can't make it in the morning at that time because it conflicts with going to shul at 6:30 or 7:10. That doesn't work out. But I've been doing it from
With the
the
tape.
YouTube recordings.
Okay, good. You should koyach.
They were good.
Okay, Samech Gimel, 63 Amud Aleph. Shachtan b'chutz kodim sheniftechu daltas ha'heichol. We learned yesterday that if you shech the shlomim prior to opening the doors of the heichal, so since it says you have to shech the shlomim lifnei Hashem, when the doors are closed, it's not really considered lifnei Hashem yet. So we said if you shech the shlomim before they opened up the doors, it's possible. Therefore, a corollary is if you shecht a kosher korban bachutz outside of the azor, you're chayiv kores. However, if you shachton bachutz kodim sheniftechu daltas ha'heichel potter. If you shechted the shlomim prior to opening up the doors, the animal is puzzle. So therefore, if you shechted it bachutz before they opened up the doors, potter from kores, because it wouldn't have been a valid chorus. My time. A mechusar psichik, a mechusar meiser dummy. It's like you didn't do one of the required meises to the korban. The lack of the psich of the heichel. So it's a hoyel concept. Freti Gemara miyislel Rav Chizda hoyel. Does Rav Chizda hold of this sort of hoyel, meaning it's a since it's a since type of svara? On Rav Chizda, I'll show you Rav Chizda doesn't hold of that. Pesach. Sheshachtu bachutz b'shayim osashana. So we know a korban Pesach, if you shecht it the rest of the year, not on Yud Daled Nisan, it's a kosher shlomim. It can be brought as a korban shlomim. So therefore, if you shechted a korban Pesach bachutz the rest of the year, now it depends. If you have in mind it as a Pesach, so then the shechting a korban Pesach today, Gimel Tammuz or whatever it is, whatever the date is today, which is not Yud Daled Nisan, which is the normal time to bring a korban Pesach. So if you shechted it l'shem Pesach, that would be a posel dika korban. Therefore, if you shecht a korban Pesach bachutz any other time of the year except for Erev Pesach, if you did it lishma, you'd be potter, because doing it lishma would make the korban posel. Now, if you shecht a korban Pesach shelo lishma the rest of the year, so then it would have the din of a shlomim and a kosher shlomim. Therefore, if you shecht such a korban outside the azor, you're chayiv kores. Taima, the reason why you're chayiv is the shelo lishma, because you had an active shelo lishma kavona. Now, what if you had no kavona, not lishma and not shelo lishma? That's called stama. Well, it would imply hastama implies it's lishma. That means the lack of any kavana implies that you're probably thinking of it as a Pesach, and therefore upater, and therefore would be chayiv. You would be pater for shchita chutz, because this kind of korban would secting a korban Pesach lishma not at the right time is possible. But based on this concept of hoyel, v'amai lei mahoyel v'roy shelo lishma bifnim. Since if you shechted this korban shelo lishma in the Beis Hamikdash, it would be okay. You should be chayiv kores if you're using hoyel. So the Gemara says hachiyash, there's no comparison. Awesome. By the korban Pesach, you need a special akira's kavana, boy akira. You got to remove it from its normal status. So there's no riot from there to other korbanos, because a Pesach is a Pesach unless you uproot it. But hi, lo boy akira. But by the so'ir, because we're talking about the so'ir mishtaleach, so you haven't done hagrola yet. So therefore, there's been no chalois of a kedusha on this korban, and therefore it doesn't require this sort of active akiras kavana like would be required by korban pesach. So you haven't proved to me that Rav Chizda doesn't hold of hoya. Rabba Barsimi Masile B'derabba. Rabba Barsimi learned this sugya not in the name of Rav Chizda, but in the name of Rabba. And then he asked the same kasha the Rabba de Rabba. Mashani Kiddushanina, but he gave the teretz the same way we just gave. Kios Rav Dimi Rav Yirmiyam Rav Yoichnan Pesach sheshachtu b'chutz b'shar Yemos Hashana. You have a korban Pesach that was left over after Yud Daled Nisan, and now it's 2 months later, and you shechted outside of the Azara, bein lishma, bein shelo lishma, potter. So this is different than what we just learned. Before we learned that if you shechted it shelo lishma, you'd be chayiv, because shechita for korban pesach shelo lishma is a shlomim. However, Rav Yochanan is learning that whether you shechted lishma or shelo lishma, it's going to be potter no matter what. On Rav Dimi, Amrisa Lishmaitza Kamed Rav Yirmiyah, we learned this sugya in front of Rav Yirmiyah, and we asked what we just analyzed. Bishma Lishma, I understand if you shech the korban Pesach in Tishrei, L'Shem Pesach, so that korban is going to be a pasuk korban. And therefore I would understand that if you shecht it outside the Azara, you wouldn't get the kores, the halachazile. It's not roy for anything. Ela Shalol Lishma, but I understand. Afraid Rav Dimi to Rav Yochanan. How can you say there it's also potter from kores if you shechted Shalol Lishma? Hachazi Shalol Lishma bifnim. If you shecht a korban Pesach in Tishrei, Shalol Lishma, it's going to be a shlomim. So if you shecht such a korban outside of the Azara, you should be chayiv karev. Amar li, so he gave the following teretz. Akiras chutz lo shmei akira. So he's not in the Beis HaMikdash. He's outside the Beis HaMikdash. He's chutz lazara, when he's shechting. Uprooting a status of a korban outside of the Beis HaMikdash is not called an akira. So if you would be inside and you change the kavan of this animal from a korban pesach to a shlamim, so the akira is effective. Doing it chutz lazara, it's not effective. And therefore it remains a pasal dika korban pesach, and therefore by doing it pachutz, you're not chayiv kores. That's the way the Gemara explains. Ki also Rav Yirmiyam Rav Yochanan Pesach sheshachtu b'chutz b'shei mas hashana. You shechted a korban pesach outside of the Azara in Tishrei. Bein shelo lishma, bein lishma, bein shelo lishma chayiv. So this is just the opposite of what we just quoted Rav Yochanan learning. And then the Gemara, of course, asks, how could you be chayiv afilu lishma? Afilu lishma? If you shechted a korban pesach in Tishrei lishma l'shem pesach, it wouldn't be kosher. So why would you be chayiv for shchutei chutz? Gatnan mechusr zman. If it's lacking its right time, and shechting a korban pesach not in its right time is a mechusr zman. Bein begufo, bein bebailin. Whether it's a mechusr zman because it's not old enough. For example, it needs to be 8 days old in order for a korban to be valid. Let's say it's only 3 days old. So that's an example of mechusr zman begufo. Then, bein bebailim, if it's a mechusr zman by bailim, now what is that? The Gemara doesn't understand. Ezel mechusr zman bebailim. What's an example of a korban that's disqualified because it lacks proper time by bailim? Well, that's a zav zava yolevis mitzoira. A zav or a zava needs to count 7 clean days and then bring korbanos properly in order for them to be able to bring other kodshim. So here, a mechusar zman b'bailim is one of these types of people who are tamei and who have to count 7 clean days. And then on the 8th day, they have to bring korbanos sheikrivu chatasim v'shamam bachutz, right? If they shechted their korban chatas and their korban osham that they have to bring as part of the purification process, but they did it bachutz, is peturim, because that's considered a mechusar zman, because they were not, the chatas and the osham is the korban that actually provides the purification. So since they shechted it bachutz, they had not completed their purification. And therefore that korban, the chatas and osham, would be pasul, because they hadn't completed purification, and therefore by shechting something bachutz, you would not get koris. That's why it's pturim. Oilo same v'shalmehen, which the oila and the shlamim that they bring, so that's not part of the purification process. Therefore bachutz chayovin, but that explains what a mechusar zman by bailim is, like a zav and a zava by their chatas and their osham. And when do we say their potter is only lishmo? Aval shelo lishmo chayiv. But if they did it shelo lishmo, they would be chayiv, because an ashram that is shechted shelo lishmo is a kosher dika korban. So therefore, you'd be chayiv for shchutei chutz. But lishmo, right? If you shechted a chatas or nasham bachutz, that clearly would be a pasul dika korban, and therefore by shchutei chutz they'd be potter lishmo mi a potter. But amai, we should use name a hoyel ru'uyin shelo lishmo bifnim. If the concept of hoyel was correct, then we should use this concept of hoyel and say, well, if you shechted them inside, even shelo lishmo, they'd be okay. And so therefore, why don't we use the hoyel for the lishmo case outside? More says hachi hash, there's no comparison. Hasam boy akira. By the ashram, you need an akira mefureshes to be machshirid. But hacha pesach a pesach tishrei time is without any akira a shlamim, so it didn't need an akira. Rav Ashni masti chayiv. Rav Ashni didn't say these cases are potter. He said they're chayiv, like we explained. Rav Yireh midifti masni potter ksaver pesach b'shem masashon boy akira. Number one, he said, not like we said now that a pesach in Tishrei doesn't require akira. He says it requires an akira. However, since you're shechting it bachutz, akira is chutz losh akira. It's only when you're in the base of mikdash that you change the status of a korban through your kavana, but outside the akira doesn't do anything, which is a pligid Rav Chilki bar Tovi, which therefore would be in contradiction to Rav Chilki, who said it would be effective. Okay, Amaman. Once you did the lottery on the 2 goats, so there was another, and one of them died. So we said, if you did the lottery, if you did the lottery and you had 2 goats and you shechted both of them, bachutz, chayiv al shel shem, you're chayiv 1 shchutei chutz, because one of the goats was going to be nikrav to Hashem. One of the goats is going to be sent to Azazel. The goat that is sent to Azazel is not really a korban, because there's no blood received. It's not thrown on the mizbeach. So for shchutei chutz, you're only going to be chayiv for one of them, not for both of them. Chayiv al shel shem, the one that's la Hashem, you're going to be chayiv for shchutei chutz. But upoter al shel Azazel, if you shech the salt, your Azazel bachutz, you're not chayiv for shchutei chutz. Harabanon ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shor o chesav o ez b'machaneh, a person who shechts an ox, a sheep or a goat, not in the Beis HaMikdash, but rather in the field. He didn't shecht it in front of Oil Moed. Lakriv korban Lashem, and then the pasuk says he's chayiv kores for shchutei chutz. Now, korban. So the pasuk seems this is a medrash in Torah's Kohanim. It's a baraisa. So shemeani afilu koche berek habayis shenekru korban. If you donate an animal to the temple treasury, not to be used as a korban. So I might think that even if I shechted an animal like that, not an animal designated for the mizbech, but an animal designated for temple upkeep, where the Torah refers to it as a korban, because it says kinyan shenemar vanakrev es korban Hashem, and there it's clearly not dealing with, because it says et sadat samita bata gil chumaz. It talks about all the various golden jewelry that was taken from Midian, which is clearly going to go to temple treasury. I might, since the Torah refers to even berek habayis as korban, so I might have thought even if I shechted such an animal that was donated, you'd be chai for shchutei chutz. Talmud lemer vel pesach ol moed lo hevio. You didn't bring it to Oil Moed, but it's not just didn't bring it. Anything that was roy, that was could have been brought.
Eligible.
Could have been brought. Eligible for Oil Moed, chayv alav b'chutz. But these things are not eligible to be brought. Kol she'ein roy lepesach ol moed, eino chayv alav b'chutz. Now, otzi elu she'ein roy lepesach ol moed. Fine. An animal designated for berek habayis you're going to exclude from shchutei chutz. But maybe lo otzi, poras chatas v'sor mishtaleach, shuroy lo pesach ol moed. Now, a paraduma. So even though you don't shech the paraduma either, or a sora mishtaleach. Now, the goat, at least there's a goyrel done in front, and you do a vidui in front of Oil Moed. So maybe those were royal lavil pesach moed. So therefore, perhaps if I shech the sora mishtaleach, I would be chayiv. Talmud lemer laShem. Mi shemiyuchadim laShem. Only korbanos that are miyuchad laShem. So the para and the sa'ir are not considered that miyuchad laShem, and therefore they're not chayav for shchutei chutz. V'laShem lahoitzihu. So is it true that the words laShem are going to be moitzi para and sa'ir from shchutei chutz? Reminu. It says yeratzeh lekorban ishel laShem. Elu ishim. This refers only korbanos where part of the korban is put on a fire. So a regular korban, a shlamim, a chatas, an asham, an ola, all of those korbanos, the blood is put on the mizbeach, the limbs are put on the mizbeach. Minayin shelo yagdishenu b'chusr zman. Now, what if the korban was lacking time? Like it was only 3 days old. It's got to be 8 days old. But let's say it was not. It was mechusar zman. Talmud lemer korban laShem. Korban. It's got to be a korban, and if it's not 8 days old, it's not a korban. But then laShem leraboy sar mishtaleach. The word laShem is coming to include the sar mishtaleach the din of shchutei chutz. That even though technically no part of the goat that sent la'azazel goes on the fire, the word laShem includes it in this parsha of shchutei chutz. The reasoning is because of the context of the parsha that these psukim appear in. Hasam, the El Pesach L'Rabois, in the first case, where the El Pesach is, we said L'Rabois, it comes to include certain things. The Lashem is Lahotzi. No, that's by Shchutei Chutz, where the El Pesach comes to be Marbe, even other korbanos. So there the Lashem excludes. But by the Sorah Mishtaleach, the Isha excludes all the other things, all the other korbanos, like Paraduma that's not put on the Mizbech. Lashem is L'Rabois. And since the Sorah Mishtaleach is designated as Lashem, it's included in the din of Shchutei Chutz. But only because time of the Rabbi Rachmana. Haloi Rabbi, if the Torah didn't say Lashem, Avamina, Sorah Mishtaleach Kadosh b'Mechus Zman. So comes out that the Sorah Mishtaleach, even if it was not 8 days old, would still get sanctified. But I thought that since the pair of goats, you do a lottery on the pair of goats. One of those pair of goats is going to be a korban Lashem, the Sorah Lashem. That has to be Roy, has to be at least 8 days old, and they have to be equal. So how can you tell me that the riboy by the Sorah Mishtaleach is even if it was a Mechusar Zman? The din is a poradoma that was burnt not in its right place, and the Sorah Mishtaleach that was shechted bachutz after the vidui is potter, because they're not roy lepesach omoy. But anyways, how do you answer this question? On Rav Yosef, Hamani Chanana Mitzrihi, that he holds the Lesle Hagrola Mishahigrilu Meis Echad Mehem, that if you have two goats and you did the Hagrola, you designated one to be Lashem, one to be, and then one of them died, you don't have to bring new pair of goats and do another Hagrola. You just bring another goat without Hagrola. So from the Psukim, Chanan Mitzri has to learn that you can't bring him a Chusr Zman. That goat that's going to be the replacement has to be at least 8 days old. Where do we see this, Titania? Chanan Mitzri Oimer. Afilu dam bakois, maybe chaver mezavik lo. For example, I have the two goats. I've done a hagrola. One is standing at the gate and it's ready to be sent lazazel. The other one was shechted, and the blood is in a cup, and the kohen has to take that cup into the Kodesh Kadoshim and sprinkle it. All of a sudden, that cup spills. There's no more blood. So you need to bring a korban to be able to do the sprinklings of blood. What do? According to the Chachamim, you got to start again with two new goats. And then you do Agrol on the replacement, the one that you choose Lashem replaces it. But Chanan Mitzri says no. Afilu dam bakois mevi chaver mezavig lo. You just bring another goat and bring it and shecht it. So Eimer de Shamis el Chanan Mitzri de Leslei de Chuyin. Maybe Chanan Mitzri holds this because he doesn't hold of the concept of dichui. That means even if the goat sent Lazazel dies, the remaining goat Lashem is not pushed away. It's not nidcha. And you just bring another goat to send out Lazazel. But the Lesle Hagrola Mishamisle, but doing it without any kind of Hagrola, does Chanan Mitzri hold that you don't need a Hagrola? Maybe Dilma Maisi Umagril. Maybe when it says that he brings it, he doesn't just bring it from the market. He brings two and he does a Hagrola. And the Hagrola says La Hashem, he brings that one. So you haven't bring me a raya that it can be done without Hagrola. Rav Yosef, Hamani Rab Shimoni. There is a Tana who holds of this, Rab Shimon, the Tanya. You have 2 goats, and you've done a hagrala, and Meis Echad, may one of them dies, maybe Chaveru Shelo Ba'agrala Divripshin. So he says Beferish. The other goat that you have to, the replacement goat, is not done with the hagrala, where you bring 2 and you do a lottery, and the one that you need comes out and fills the place. No. If the Sor Lashem died, you bring another goat, and that's the new Sor Lashem. Now, Ravina Amar, Kagon Shehumam v'chilalo alacher. You can explain, not just according to Rabbi Shimon, according to everybody, that we're talking about the animal became a balmum, the first goat, and then you redeemed it, because you're allowed to redeem a korban if it's a balmum, right? Then, because this goat comes from the koach of the Rishon, it doesn't require a hagrala, according to everybody. Umenot tamer de posel beimuma. And where do you see that a mum is pasels a sor mishtalech? You might think that maybe a goat that goes lazazel, it's not really a korban. So how do you know that it would be nifsal with a mum? Right? Umenot tamer de posel beimuma, the Tanya. It says v'ishel lo sitnu mehem. Don't put on the fire from these korbanos. And what should you not put? Elu achalovim. For example, normally, if you have normally a korban, the chalev is thrown on a mizbeach, but if a balmum, right, it says averet or shavur or charutz or yabelet. If it's blind, if it's got a broken leg, lo sakrivu elu lashem. Don't offer them v'yishel lo sitnu mehem, and don't put anything on the fire. Now, if you don't offer. So v'ishel lo sitnu mehem teaches me elu achalovim. Ein li alakulon. So maybe all of the chalev you can, but maybe miktsasa, maybe some of the chalev minayin, maybe you could. Talmud Lamer mehem. From none of them can you bring. And mizbeach zuzrikas damim. Any balmum, you're not allowed to do the zrikas adam on the mizbeach. But Lashem, the Rabbi Sar Mishtalech, the Lashem, to tell me that Sar Mishtalech is also considered Lashem, and it's invalidated if it's a Balmum. The Itzrich lemichtiv Balmum, the Itzrich lemichtiv mechusar zman. The fact that these korbanos are nifsal, I had to be told the fact that a Balmum is nifsal and a mechusar zman is nifsal. The ikaz rachon mechusar zman only, like it's not 8 days old. It's not the time for it. Aval balmum demati zman, maybe emelo, maybe we wouldn't be so severe. The ikaz rachon balmum mishum demois. An animal that's a balmum is disgusting in front of Hashem. Aval mechusar zman deloy mois. It's not a matter that it's disgusting. It just lacks time. Maybe emelo. Maybe I wouldn't have said there is. Maybe I would have also said there isn't such a restriction by a balmum. So tzricha. So the halacha is hamum poisel b'sar mishtalech afilu mum oiver. And if nasa mechusar, if it becomes a kind of korban that's mechusar zman, like a zav or a zava, or let's say it's not 8 days old, so they're all posel. And if you shech the balmum l'shem korban, you get malchus. If you do zrikas adam or you throw the chalev on the mizbech of a balmum, you also get malchus. Okay, very complicated.